After the chaos of Babel, when humanity was stripped of its unity and the Tower of Arrogance lay abandoned like a corpse on the plain of Shinar, the clans wandered in confusion, each speaking a language that the others could no longer comprehend. It was a judgment from God, but also a new beginning. The Canaanites, sons of Ham, descendants of a lineage marked by disobedience, migrated from the ruins of Babel toward new lands, driven by a desire for greatness, ambition, and dominion. They walked for days, weeks, perhaps years, crossing relentless deserts, scorching hills and unnamed valleys, until one day they reached the Jordan Valley. There, before their eyes, a paradise unfolded, a verdant, damp, and fertile plain, covered with fruit trees, fields that danced with golden ears of wheat, and a river that snaked with vigor, as if the earth itself breathed through it. And there they proclaimed, "Here we will build our glory. Here we will raise Sodom." The foundation was brutal, as was the determination of their people. Sodom was built with blood and fire, for every stone was conquered with their hands, every meter of land irrigated with sweat and effort. The Canaanites worked like maniacs. They carved the rock with bronze tools, delineating straight streets that cut through the city like veins of order and power. They raised high, thick, and impregnable walls, as if to challenge any attempt by the world to enter without permission. They mastered engineering, building perfect canals that led the waters of the Jordan to their fields, their squares, their gardens. They mastered agriculture, and the land seemed to be under a spell, responding with abundance: figs, dates, barley, grapes, and linen. In a short time, the city began to attract people from afar. Merchants arrived from Egypt, caravans from Arabia, travelers from Anatolia. All desired to contemplate the jewel of the plain. The residences of Sodom were tall, made of white stone with wide doors and spacious balconies. Purple fabrics hung like standards in the wind, and the aroma of incense and fresh bread mingled in the air. There were fountains sculpted with mythological scenes, hanging gardens irrigated by hidden canals, and squares where musicians chanted melodies on lutes, drums, and flutes. At night, the city glowed with torches, dances, music, laughter, and festivities. The city was opulent, immensely rich. Commerce was its lifeblood. Caravans arrived laden with gold, ivory, precious gems, perfumed oils, flavored wine, and even slaves. Sodom's blacksmiths forged exquisite weapons. Sculptors carved images of the deities with details so vivid they seemed to breathe. Artisans worked linen, silk, and leather, all with excellence. And when the time came to establish a throne, the people elected the most cunning, the most charismatic, and the most ambitious among them, Bera, the first king of Sodom. Bera was young, with an impeccable countenance and a seductive tongue. He possessed the dangerous talent of making immorality seem just and perversity shine like virtue. He governed with a charming smile, but behind it concealed a corruption as deep as it was silent. Under his reign, Sodom reached the height of its glory and also plunged into the shadows of its darkest decadence. On the other hand, while Sodom rose in the fertile lands of the Jordan as a city of power and gold, Gomorrah was built further south, in the shadow of its older sister, but with a distinct, more subtle essence, more intoxicated by art and pleasure. If Sodom was a jewel sculpted with strength and ambition, Gomorrah was a poisonous flower of irresistible beauty. Its foundation was less brutal and more aesthetic. The Canaanites who established it were sculptors, musicians, poets, and architects who loved details and form. They chose the gentle hills south of the valley, where the sun set with a golden light. There they built delicately decorated temples, polished stone streets, and houses that resembled palaces adorned with hanging gardens, curtains of linen dyed purple and blue, and fountains where the water fell like melody. Gomorrah did not rival Sodom in strength, but in elegance. It was a city where the arts flourished, where songs narrated legends and theaters staged dramas about gods and human passions. The people indulged in the delight of the senses. Every festivity was a celebration of the body, of pleasure, of freedom without restrictions. There the sacred mingled with the sensual. Fertility rituals transformed into grandiose spectacles where men and women, intoxicated with wine and desire, gave themselves up without shame, without morals, without conscience. The first king of Gomorrah was Bersha, a man with an angular face, a captivating voice, and an intoxicating gaze. He was a master in the art of pleasing the people. Under his leadership, lust was institutionalized and pleasure became law. He governed not by force but by seduction. Bersha fostered a culture of absolute freedom, where every form of desire was valid, and thus Sodom and Gomorrah became an infernal duo, two jewels of power and perversion on the plain of the Jordan. Each one fueled the corruption of the other. Among the many abominations they committed was the rampant practice of homosexuality. The first signs emerged amidst the abundance. When man no longer fights for bread, he begins to fight against limits. And the men of Sodom, rich, idle, and arrogant, began to pervert their natural desires. They stopped seeking women and began to covet other men. First in secret, then within their circles of power, and soon without any shame in the streets, in the squares, at the doors of houses. This sin was not a mere hidden practice or a fleeting transgression. It was culture, it was the norm, it was an institutionalized source of pride. What in other societies was still considered a secret shame, in Sodom and Gomorrah was proclaimed as a symbol of freedom, a crown of identity amidst a society intoxicated with itself. They boasted of their unrestrained appetite, displaying it as a virtue. At the king's banquets, it was common for guests to engage in relations with youths brought as offerings of desire. There was no need to hide, nor to remain silent, for in Sodom the perverse was exalted, and the voice of God had been silenced by the applause of men. The temples dedicated to false gods were stages where fertility was worshipped, not through marital love but through acts that violated everything that was sacred. Men with men, priests with acolytes, elders with boys, all under the guise of a spiritual connection, all protected under the banner of a false deity. Pleasure was their god, perversion their liturgy. Children grew up seeing impurity as an example. They taught them that there are no limits, that desire is the only law. They showed them images, told them stories, and instructed them to reject any teaching that came from a god of prohibitions. The judges did not punish immorality. On the contrary, they punished the righteous who denounced it and the foreigners who crossed the city gates. The men of Sodom did not consider them guests but prey for their lust. No one entered Sodom without being tempted, without being touched, without being tested. The most sacred act, the union between man and woman idealized by God in Eden, was trampled, ridiculed, and replaced by a culture of unnatural relations dominated by the desire for power, pleasure, and ego. There was no love, no fidelity, only impulse, only lust, only flesh and wealth. And it was precisely this prosperity that attracted Lot. While living with his uncle Abraham, Lot also prospered greatly. His flocks grew, his tents multiplied, and his possessions expanded so much that an inevitable conflict soon arose. Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds argued, clashed, and accused each other. The land could no longer sustain so much abundance. What was once unity was now tension. The harmony that united them began to crumble under the weight of plenty. It was then that Abraham, the man of the altar, the friend of God, stood up with the dignity of a patriarch. He approached his nephew Lot, the young man he had welcomed after his father's death. He looked at him with tenderness, but with firmness, and said, "Please let there be no strife between us. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. You choose first." And Lot lifted his eyes, and what he saw changed his destiny. Before him stretched the plain of the Jordan, an earthly paradise. It was like Eden before the fall, green fields, crystal clear waters, pure air. And there, glittering like a temptation wrapped in gold, were the cities of the plain, and among them Sodom. From afar, Sodom was a spectacle to behold. Its towers reached the sky. Its markets resonated with silver and gold coins. Its squares teemed with people, aromas, music, and laughter. It was a vibrant, seductive, and powerful city, and Lot succumbed to its charm. He did not consult God, did not seek counsel, simply contemplated and desired. It was the beginning of the end. With firm steps, Lot separated from Abraham and went down to the plain. At first he pitched his tent near Sodom, only on the periphery. but like a shadow that lengthens at sunset, Sodom's influence enveloped him. Soon his business was inside the city, then his house, then his heart. Lot dwelt in Sodom amidst the perversion, debauchery, and sin, and he did not leave there. Although his righteous soul was troubled by what he saw, luxury spoke louder. Comfort lulled him to sleep. Silence imprisoned him. He had sought prosperity without considering the consequences that this decision would have on his family. Thus, blinded by abundance, he followed his own path without caring about their future. There, in the heart of that corrupt city, Lot raised his daughters, pure young women born into their father's faith, but daily exposed to the darkness of Sodom. They witnessed the perversion firsthand. They heard the screams that pierced the nights. They saw the impure rituals performed in broad daylight. They walked through streets filled with men lost in homosexuality, where sin was not hidden, but celebrated with pride. They grew up in a place without an altar, where the name of God was mocked, where impurity had become common and the sacred a forgotten memory. Despite this, Lot's daughters were promised in marriage to 2 men of Sodom, but these men did not fear God. They were part of Sodom, born in its streets, molded by its environment. Perhaps they did not participate in the worst excesses, but they were not righteous, nor holy, nor obedient to the God of Abraham. And so life continued in Sodom and Gomorrah. Every day these cities sank further and further into an open and flagrant rebellion against God. But God would not ignore this. The Most High, who had been patient, who had waited, who had watched in silence, had heard the cry, a cry that rose from the earth like bitter smoke, the cry of the oppressed, of the despised righteous, of the profaned innocents, reached the celestial throne, and then judgment was decreed. But before the fire descended, God decided to visit his friend Abraham. In the heat of the day, while the patriarch sat at the entrance of his tent, the Lord appeared to him accompanied by 2 celestial men. Abraham saw them, ran to them and honored them, unaware that he was about to hear a judgment that would shake his heart. "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great," the Lord said, "and their sin is very severe. I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me." Abraham trembled. He thought of his nephew Lot, his family, the possibility, however remote, that there were still righteous people amidst so much darkness. With tears in his soul and a trembling voice, he interceded before God. "Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked, Lord? If there are 50 righteous, will you destroy them?" And God replied, "If I find 50 righteous in Sodom, I will spare all the place for their sakes." Abraham insisted, "What if there are 45, 40, 30, 20, or 10? But with every plea, the answer was the same. "If there are 10 righteous, I will forgive them." However, in all of Sodom and Gomorrah, not even this small remnant of hope was found. Evil had corrupted everything. Even the fiancés of Lot's daughters mocked the message of salvation. And then the 2 angels departed for Sodom. They descended from the heights, appearing as men carrying God's judgment. The city was still singing, still laughing, still delighting in its sin, oblivious to the fact that its final night had begun. When they arrived, Lot was sitting at the city gate. He was not there by chance. He was in his position as a judge, fulfilling his duty amidst a wicked generation. And when he saw them, something within him stirred. He immediately got up, prostrated himself with his face to the ground, and pleaded for them to enter his house. They accepted the invitation and entered Lot's house. They closed the door behind them, and night fell over Sodom like a thick and silent veil. But hell was about to break loose, and it didn't take long for that to happen. The news spread like fire on dry grass. Strangers had arrived, new and different men, and the rumors awakened the city's dormant lust. From every corner, every house, every immoral street, young and old began to gather. All the men of Sodom arrived and surrounded Lot's house like a hungry pack of dogs. They banged on the door, shouting and demanding, "Where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out. We want to know them." The perversion was no longer hidden. Now it demanded, wanting to penetrate even the last corner, even the very dwelling of the righteous man. Lot went out of the house in despair, closed the door behind him, and faced the crowd, his heart racing. "I beg you, my brothers, "Do not commit this wickedness." And then, in a desperate act, perhaps influenced by the culture that surrounded him, Lot offered his own daughters. "I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. I will bring them out to you, and you may do to them as seems best to you. But do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But the men of Sodom did not want the daughters, did not seek women. They wanted the men. Their lust was specific, perverse, violent. "Get out of the way," they shouted. "This foreigner came to dwell here and now wants to be a judge. We will deal worse with you than with them." And they attacked Lot. But then the hand of heaven intervened. The angels opened the door, grabbed Lot, and pulled him inside with force, and with a single word, with a single look, the men of Sodom became blind. Darkness enveloped them. They stumbled over each other, groped for the door, cursed and shouted, but could no longer see, for judgment had begun and the time of grace was running out. The angels turned to Lot with urgency. "Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters? Get them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this city. The outcry against it has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Lot trembled. He ran to his sons-in-law, his daughters' fiancés, and pleaded with them, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city." But they thought he was joking. They did not believe him, and remained there to die. At dawn, the angels insisted with Lot, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. He still loved that place, still looked back. And then the angels grabbed him, along with his wife and his 2 daughters, by the hand and led them outside. They were dragged out because God's mercy still burned in favor of Lot. And when they were outside, one of the angels spoke powerfully, "Escape for your life, do not look behind you, do not stay in all the plain. Escape to the mountains lest you be consumed." Lot fled with his family. The sun was rising. Meanwhile, the men of Sodom and Gomorrah continued in their wickedness. The streets teemed at dawn, not with worship, but with sin. The agitation was not of prayer, but of mocking laughter, of filthy markets, of profane altars, of bodies offered as a form of carnal worship. The drums continued to beat in the pagan temples. The priests danced amidst the incense and perversion, and no one imagined that heaven was no longer silent. Judgment was underway, and they did not know it. And it was at that moment, amidst their arrogance, that the sky opened. It was not a common storm. It was not rain. It was the roar of judgment. It was the thunder of the Eternal's wrath. A gigantic abyss formed in the heights, as if heaven itself had been torn open by an invisible sword. From that opening, living, conscious and thirsty flames burst forth. Rains of fire and brimstone began to fall with uncontrollable fury. Sodom trembled. Gomorrah screamed. Houses exploded into flames on contact. Entire towers collapsed in seconds. The earth seemed to devour its inhabitants. It was as if hell had been unleashed upon the earth. The stones burned, the air was fire, the rivers boiled, the trees exploded, the inhabitants fled in a frenzy, shrouded in smoke, drenched in sweat, covered in ashes. Mothers dragged their bare feet through the flaming streets. Arrogant men who once boasted of their power ran like aimless animals, their eyes full of terror. The city's smell was replaced by the stench of burnt flesh and vaporized blood. Some begged their gods, others knelt looking at the sky, but the answer was more fire. Roofs burned, sculptures melted like wax, and from afar came the screams of beasts fleeing to the desert, while the heart of the cities collapsed under a rain of celestial fury. Lot, with his face covered, fled with his wife and daughters. Behind them, hell consumed everything. But she, Lot's wife, did not resist. Her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She turned her head for a second, an instant, and was petrified. Her flesh evaporated, her soul froze. A pillar of white and somber salt rose where a wife, a mother, a woman who had been warned once stood. And as the family continued their flight in the distance, they could glimpse the last breaths of the cursed cities. The ground was still smoking, the stones hot to the touch. Ravens circled over what were once vast human empires, and the wind carried with it the aroma of God's justice. Sodom had been swallowed by the heavens, Gomorrah erased from the map. Lot, in turn, fled not by force, not by his own choice. He fled because God was pulling him out of the hell he had called home for years. His body was safe, but his soul still trembled. His daughters followed him covered in ashes, without a mother, without land, without hope. They were the last of his lineage, the last survivors of the apocalypse. They arrived at Zoar, a small insignificant town ignored by the flames but not by fear. There fire did not rain, but nightmares did. Lot could not sleep. He saw faces burning in his dreams. He heard screams every time he closed his eyes. He felt the weight of his wife, transformed into salt with a simple turn of the head. There was no peace in Zoar, just a constant whisper that said, "It's not over yet." And so fear drove them out again like shadows. They crawled to the mountains, and there, in the solitude of a cave, they hid. Darkness enveloped them. The cold penetrated their bones, and silence spoke to them in that abyss of loneliness, without men, without people, without hope. Lot's daughters began to talk among themselves. They had grown up in Sodom, amidst idolatry and perversion. Although they had escaped judgment, judgment had not escaped them. And there, among the stones, the idea sprouted, an idea that could only be born from a heart deformed by sin. There is no man on earth to come into us, after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. And so they did. On the first night, they prepared wine, served it, and poured it. Lot drank until he lost consciousness. And when silence reigned, the older daughter entered the cave, lay with her father, and he did not notice when she lay down or when she got up. The seed of sin had been sown. The following night, they repeated the act. The younger daughter followed her sister's steps. Lot, once again intoxicated, lay with his second daughter without realizing it. In those dark nights, in the back of the cave, the sin that God had buried under the fire resurfaced in the wombs of those young women. And from those wombs were born Moab and Ben-Ammi, two names that would be a curse for generations, two peoples who would erect pagan altars, burn their children in sacrifices, wage war against Israel, and blaspheme the name of the living God. The sin of Sodom did not die with the fire. It hid in a cave, multiplied, and became a nation. And thus the world learned a forgotten lesson. It is not enough to flee from judgment. It is necessary to be transformed, for otherwise the curse that destroyed a city will settle in your lineage.